the big question in my mind had always been, can I do this move of Defying Gravity after doing a V13 intro? And so on session 13, I had proved, yes, I can. I just fell on the next move. So then it was like, okay, well, yes, you've done the big test. You did this one move after being super fatigued, but you didn't do the boulder. So you still got to do the boulder. You still got to stay psyched. But at the same time, I was like, man, I just kind of want to be done with it. So yeah, third go, felt good through the bottom. My feet felt a little bit weird, but the move felt floater. And then I didn't have that like exhilaration that I did my first time sticking the move from the ground. I had like a sense of, okay, it is not over. I need to chalk up. I need to eye down this hold, and I need to execute this final move because I cannot fall here again. And I almost fumbled it again. It was it was close. I hit it like pretty shallow, and I had to try really hard to hold. But yeah, topping out from there, it's probably like V4 or V5. And I remember the first thought that I had was, am I sure that I started at the bottom? Like I didn't dab or anything on the traverse, right? Because you're in this state of disbelief as you're doing these outro moves. And then it was just a massive sense of relief and psych.
Nathaniel Coleman, back on Testpiece. So good to see you, man. How you doing?
Yeah, doing good. I'm glad to be back.
Dude, Nathaniel, it's been a minute. Over a year since you've been on, and you've done some amazing things in the meantime, which is saying something because last time you were on the pod, you had already gotten a silver medal in the Olympics. You had done first ascents of V16s and just countless wins and hard sends of every type. But today we're having a special podcast because Nathaniel, you just did something special. You did the first ascent of One Mourns The Wicked, the highly sought after sit to the iconic Testpiece, Defying Gravity. Congrats, man.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm psyched to just dive into everything about it today.
Me too, because that line just completed the whole boulder. It made an already hard, beautiful climb, Defying Gravity, even harder and more beautiful. And you're proposing V17 as the grade. And I'm proposing that's the most beautiful V17 in the world. So congratulations again. I know I speak for a lot of people, man, when I say that we are so happy to see you continuing to push the sport and just achieving, like whatever you put your mind to.
Hey, much appreciated. it's been uh it's been a lot of fun like transitioning to more outdoor climbing since I stopped competing, and very rewarding. So I appreciate like everybody still supporting me in that change of direction.
Yeah, well, it's been a heck of a year since you kind of have transitioned. And like I said, actually, since the podcast, you did Defying Gravity, which is the stand, and now No One Mourns the Wicked, which is the sit to that line. And again, what makes this podcast special, other than just having you on, is that we're going to release this simultaneously with a video documenting that process and the send. And you can find that video on YouTube on Mellow. And it was created by the amazing Ben Nielsen, who also was behind the original video of you sending Defying Gravity about a year ago.
Yep, yep. Yeah, this will be like a working in tandem kind of podcast video. So I'm kind of psyched. I don't know if I've ever seen something like this done, but hopefully people can go watch the video, and then if they want to learn more about uh, the boulder, come over here and get like the full in depth. So
Yeah, I'm always surprised that we don't see more of that. I mean, I freaking love Ben's videos. I just want to say it, like they are amazing, but they're a video. And so they have a certain context and it's a certain type of medium and they are beautiful, but just by their very nature, they can't necessarily tell the whole entire story because they're focused on that journey and then that special moment and putting it together in a beautiful way. But now I get to talk to you and I just literally pressed stop on the video to record with you. And so I have a million questions because I know that, I mean, even with our multi-hour podcast, we can never really tap into the whole journey, but I'm looking forward to it. And let's start with Defying Gravity because that was a big deal when you sent it. And that has been about a year ago. And I just want to hear more about what got you interested in that line in the first place. I mean, it had sat dormant for like 10 years, except for Austin Guyman working on it. And so it wasn't really on anyone's radar, despite it looking like one of the best hard blocks in America. So why did you set your sights on Defying Gravity to start with?
Yeah. As with most things in my life, I feel like a lot of the motivation came from those around me. It had always been a boulder that I was inspired by. I think, like many people of my age, uh, the the bear cam video of Jimmy Webb doing that crazy like coordination 1-2. It was like unlike anything I'd ever seen before. And growing up a gym climber, I was like, wow, it's like a dynamic coordination move outside, like, and it's V15. I got to try that one day. So it's always been something that I wanted to try, but you always find excuses. Oh well, this year's not going to work. Oh, I'm not strong enough this year. Um, and so in 2023, my friends they were like, dude, when are you going to go do it? Like, go do it. You're not comp climbing anymore. You got to go try it. And yeah, I'm really grateful for that.
Can you tell me about that first day when you drove out there and just what it was like walking up to it and what you felt when you first saw that thing?
Yeah. I remember hearing about the hike. It's quite long. It's about 2 miles. Mostly flat, but the end starts to get a little bit uphill. So by the time you get to the boulder, you're pretty winded, especially if you're carrying pads, which we all were. And I remember being kind of like shocked at, well, not shocked, but I remember being surprised at what the boulder looked like in person. I guess I didn't realize from the video that it's like part of a cliff band, and it is very steep. Like, I think 50 or 55 degrees overhanging. And that kind of took me by surprise as well. It's in this like cool kind of corridor that's filled with aspens. When it's really windy, there's like it sounds like the aspens are screaming, which is really cool. And then the hike up is all it's it's all like burnt forest from a fire that was like 20 years ago. So it's a really weird kind of landscape as you're approaching. But and then the boulder itself is super intimidating. It looks like the move isn't going to be that big. Um, and I think that that's just because it's everybody's tendency to underestimate how steep it is and how slick the holds are. But I just remember walking up to it and being like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm standing under it in person. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's weird how when something is really steep, when you look at it, like the vertical change of a move doesn't look that big. But then when you get under it and you're like, oh, I don't just have to go up, I have to go back also. And so that definitely stretches it out. And I'm curious when you walked up and felt those holds, like what were your first thoughts? Were you like, oh, actually, I got this. Like I can own this. Or were you like, ooh, that's not quite what I expected.
Yeah, I was way overconfident when I first grabbed the holds. They're so big. Uh, like the left hand is almost a full pad. The right hand is more than a full pad. The thing you're going to is like a pad and a half with a good thumb catch. And yeah, like I said, the move just doesn't look that big. My buddy who like kind of like pushed me to go out there, or one of my buddies, he had always joked about like, dude, like if you do it perfectly, you could flash Defying Gravity. And I was always like, yeah, whatever, whatever. But, I'll give it a good go. And so I got up there and I started feeling the holds and I was like, dude, I'm going to give it like a really good go, actually. Like, I think this is possible. And then I just, yeah, of course, got nowhere close.
Well, I love that you came with the confidence, and it's also cool that even though it didn't work out quite on the flash attempt, that something about it still grabbed you to really. I mean, you how many sessions? Yeah, how many times have you been out to that boulder now?
uh, 22.
Yeah, that's a lot, man. Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
lot.
definitely, definitely my most projected boulder compared to Grand Illusion, which was 9 sessions.
So you grab those holds, you're like, oh, these are buckets. I don't know what those guys were doing. This doesn't seem that bad. You don't quite flash it.
Hmm.
And what then became the difficulty of the move? Like what was it that stopped you from not just being able to go from kind of like good hold to good hold?
I feel like a lot of the early sessions last year when I was just trying to find gravity were sorting out beta, trying to figure out what method was going to work best. Because there's Austin's method, Jimmy's method, um, and it makes the move kind of very different. And then I didn't even know about it at the time, but Noah came up and showed us all Noah's method with the campus. So yeah, a lot of those early sessions, we were climbing with Austin. We were trying his beta. We were kind of messing around with Jimmy's beta with the heel hook, but it feels so hard when you first try Jimmy's beta. Whereas when you first try Austin's beta, you can like get a lot of upward momentum and you can even get your hand on the hold, but then it's really hard to get the right kind of jump in order to stick the hold. And so we were like, maybe 3 sessions in, we were like getting our hand on it and we were swinging off and we were like, oh, that was so close. But we weren't really that close and we just didn't realize it at the time. So a big change, a big like catalyst towards me sending was talking to Jimmy on the phone and getting some insights and some beta that he remembered from like 10, 11 years ago, by the way. Super impressive that he remembers anything about the boulder. And yeah, after hearing his input, it was like the next session, the heel hook beta was starting to come online. And I think like 2 sessions, 3 sessions after that, I finally stuck the move.
Yeah, that's really hard to switch beta to something that feels trickier when you're like, oh, dude, I'm all over it with the pogo. Like I just need to like get that timing right and then kind of committing to the heel beta when at first it sounds not so good. Do you remember what that micro adjustment was that Jimmy shared with you that allowed you to kind of commit to it?
Yeah. And uh, if you've just watched the video of No One Mourns the Wicked, you'll have a pretty good understanding of what the move is. So the things that Jimmy really unlocked for me were keeping the heel hook on as long as you can and pulling your chest into the wall at the start of the motion. Those two things allow you to kind of change the move from a crazy dynamic like throw into an almost static lock off. Like you're kind of going through the motion of a huge lock off with a far heel hook, but then as soon as you grab this hold, you're taking a massive swing, but still the beginning of the motion kind of looks and feels like a big lock off.
Dude, I love that part in No One Mourns the Wicked where you really, really go into depth on that move. And it made me wonder about your whole process of unlocking each little micro beta. And even when you read off that part in the movie, like, did you have it written down? Just like, what was the process that you went through for stacking every little micro beta to really end up basically unlocking the move and kind of having it unlock?
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. That was kind of that section of the film was like a joint vision from me and Ben. And once we like came up with the idea, he was like, if you're psyched on this sequence, like you can just build it out and then like direct it and I'll just film it however you envision it. So that was really cool working with him in that capacity. I've never like had that much control when I've worked with him on videos before. But I just thought, for a move this incredible and this complicated, I think that people would really dig learning the intricacies of it, especially in slow mo, and especially with Ben behind the camera. So yeah, I appreciate you saying that.
I just loved the. It was like this look into your mind where it was how you were grabbing these start holds, how you were thinking about placing the foot on to then put the heel on, and even just I think you said something along the lines of, "I place my left foot lightly to then jump the heel on to get weight on," and even I'm going into depth, and you haven't even fully pulled onto the move yet. Then as you move through, and you talk about your chest going, and something that really shocked me when watching you on that move was that last little bit as you snag it and you pull in, like you really, your head almost touches the rock and your legs go back, but your whole body gets even closer. And I don't know, it just, I love that. I'd love to hear more about that last little bit, because after I did that pod with Austin Guyman, he made it really clear that it's that last 2%, 3% that really makes that move special.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, finding all the micro beta and the different things to think about through establishing on the move and then through generating through the move, that just comes with like dozens of repetitions. And the process that I kind of went through learning that move last year and then perfecting the move this year was you focus on one thing until it becomes intuitive. So like the first thing that I focused on this year going back was um, like grabbing the start holds correctly. And I was like pretty happy to on my first session this year just walk up to the boulder and my hands just floated to the same exact place where I was grabbing them last year. And I was like, oh yeah, the muscle memory is still there. And then I was focusing a ton on the heel hook, getting that engagement right, keeping it on as long as possible. Once that started to feel like I didn't have to think about it as much, I was thinking about pulling in with my chest. And then finally, I was thinking about being accurate on the hold that I was going to. But something interesting that you might not notice just watching the video, when we do the move breakdown in the video, we do it for establishing for the stand start of Defying Gravity. And when I climb into the move from the low, I have to use a different left foot because of the sequence going into it. And so, yeah, the whole establishing sequence is only really relevant for the stand. So,
Yeah, I was actually wondering about that. I did notice that. I I think it's interesting how you go through this order of operations where you say, okay, let's get this thing right. And then now we're going to work on the heel hook, or now we're going to work on that coordination of pulling into the chest or latching that last hold and kind of deeply ingraining it into your body. So it's kind of a subconscious, just having on lock, right? And I'm wondering, when you are doing send burns, are you what are you thinking about on that move? Is there just one kind of thing that you decide to think about? Is there nothing and you just let your body flow? Or what does actual send burns look like on a move so intricate?
I think I got the move to a point where I could really think about nothing. Like everything had become intuitive. And if I just pulled on with the intention of getting to the next hold, my body would do what it needed to do. If there was one thing that I was focusing on, it was the heel hook. I think that that's the most finicky thing and the easiest thing to forget about, especially when you're fatigued. So on my send burns from the ground, it was definitely the heel hook. That was like the deciding factor on a lot of attempts.
Okay, something you said in the video that kind of blew my mind is this move was the most intricate move you had ever done. I think you said, I want to say you said, yeah, the most beautiful and intricate move you've ever done. And in the first video, you did the move, you did Defying Gravity. And then the beginning of No One Mourns the Wicked, you talk about how after doing the boulder, after I think the first time you stuck the move, if I'm not mistaken, you were consumed with this concept of, wow, that was a hard move, but how much better could I get at it? And what would that mean to really master a move of that caliber? And I just want to visit that because it's just not something I've really heard someone talk about. I often hear people say, I want to do this climb, it's cool. Or I want to know what I'm capable of. But I found it really interesting that you were drawn into a specific beautiful move. And then even after you achieved it, you kind of wanted to take it to the next level. And just, can you tell me more about that feeling?
It was kind of based on the process that I had been through on the last two sessions on Defying Gravity. My progress was just like so linear. It was like I was getting my hand on the hold and holding the outswing, and then my next go would be like even better. And then on my final session, I like warmed up, and it was just every go was good. Every go was closer. And then when I finally did it, it felt amazing. It felt like I had done the move really well. And yeah, it just left it in the back of my mind like, there's no way this is the end of the progress on this move. I know that I could get this consistent. And what do you know? There's a low start to to test my consistency on. So yeah, it was never a question in my mind of whether I could continue to progress on the move. It was just like, how learnable is this move? Can you do it 1 out of 10 times, 1 out of 4 times, like every time? What's the limit? And it turns out, if you have the physical fitness, which I I didn't quite have, I'll tell you about that a little later, you can do it 80% of the time, maybe higher. So it was really cool to have this one move take me 8 sessions and then continue to work on it and then get it to that place where I really wanted it to be.
That's cool, man. I don't know. I feel like we often just, maybe we luck into doing a move, or, when you like barely eke out a send or a move. And I don't know. I'm not saying it doesn't feel good to send, but you often know that it just wasn't really beautiful. It didn't feel, I should say, it didn't feel beautiful. And I just love that you had this question in your head: what if I just got really, really good at it? And honestly, man, that's a very different shift from maybe like your competition career, where it's like, well, here's this move and you get 4 minutes and you will literally never see these holds again for the rest of your life. So, enjoy it while it lasts. And so I just think that's such a interesting shift in what you got to pursue. And so I love that you dove into a move, right? Like a move. That's very different.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, it's like changed my whole approach to climbing. After I did Defying Gravity last year, I went back to Salt Lake City and I put effort into Doors of Perception, and which is it's a V15 that was established by Sean shortly before I did it, and just failing on those moves felt so easy. Like the process felt so easy compared to the process that I had been on Defying Gravity, because nothing compares to working on one move for 8 sessions and staying like mentally psyched through all that. So it's just complete. And now I just did a board lord session with tension as well, and they set us this one move that was like, for the first 30 minutes that we were trying it, they were like, oh, like, should we kick the angle back? Like, should we change some holds? Like, I don't know if, I think we made it too hard. And me and Colin were like, no, dude, like, we're making progress. It may not look like we're making progress, but we are. And yeah, eventually, Colin sticks the move. And so it definitely taught me a lot about like determination and just like belief in something that feels like truly impossible to becoming actually doable.
Okay, first of all, I'm very psyched to hear there's Board Lords coming out with you. That's
Yeah,
big news.
me and Colin. It's good.
Not as big news as your ascent of No One Mourns the Wicked and that video coming out, but pretty up there for me. I can't wait to see that. And this idea that you are learning about that fine line between possible and impossible is fascinating, man, because I think that one of the things about that move and both No One Mourns the Wicked and Defying Gravity is that it looks like one of the hardest moves in the world. And I think that as a boulderer, as an athlete, of course, I love all climbing. I love seeing beautiful sport climbs and Almondra doing, silence. But I think there's just something deeply in us that has this question about what's the hardest move that's possible. And so I very cool. Okay, you unlocked the move, you did the boulder, you wondered about what else was possible, and you saw progress on that. But it's a different move, man. You coming in from the sit, it's not the same as just pulling on. And so, can you take us a little bit through how No One Mourns the Wicked changes coming into Defying Gravity?
Yeah. The move itself is not that different. For establishing on Defying Gravity, I use a left foot that is like pretty much directly underneath me and fairly high, maybe like waist level. And when I'm climbing into it from Wicked, I use a foot that's like maybe 8 to 10 inches down and right. And it's actually a little bit more in cut. I use that foot because the last move of the intro on Wicked is the left hand move from like this undercling into the start hold of Defying Gravity. And I need like a good left foot to toe into to prevent my hips from swinging out. So that's why I use those feet. And then the heel hook is in the same place. So it's like definitely just worth it to go from that position for the move instead of trying to move the left foot into the other foot. But once it honestly felt just the same. Like once it took a little bit of a learning curve to learn the new foot, but once I learned it, it felt as easy, if not better, than the feet for Defying Gravity.
You said move unlocked in part of the video. You said you had found the final key and that you really understood it. What was that little micro beta that then you said allowed you to feel like, okay, I can go do send goes from the bottom?
Yeah. So it was session 6 of this year. It was just like one of those tries where I was more relaxed or more just in tune with what was going on with my body. I tried the move and held the outswing, and I had been holding the outswing, but then on the inswing, I was just like out of position. And I thought that it was something that I needed to do with like rotating my body around the line that's like drawn with my shoulders. But for some reason on that go, I felt like I needed to be higher. And so I like continued to push with my left hand and pull with my right hand. And then all of a sudden, that angular momentum, I was like coming down onto the foothold, and my foot made connection with the start hold. And then both my hands fired off. But immediately I was like, oh, dude, that was what I had been missing. At the end of the outswing, I need to continue to, like, I'm already at a 90-degree lock off with the right arm. I need to continue to pull even higher, and then it just makes the in-swing possible. And after figuring that out, let's see, I did the move, I fell, and then I did the move 3 times in a row. And yeah, that's why I said move unlocked, because it was truly like I had gone from once a session to 4 times in a session.
Dude, that was that part that I called out a little bit earlier where it looks so strange to me how you pull up even more after sticking it. Your hair freaking, it looks like your head basically like brushes the wall. And I don't know if you remember this, but it was one of my favorite parts of the last podcast we did where you talked about collision fracturing. And I had, I hadn't really heard that term, but then I feel like you added this new little bit to it where it's like instead of going limp and trying to absorb it, you pulled even tighter and stronger into your shoulders. But then what I hear you saying is that what that also did is on the outswing, when you come back in, it made that angle better. And when I see you do it perfectly, your foot comes back and just nicely connects with it looks like a ballet move. It's perfect.
Yeah, it was a crazy session. I remember being like so stoked, like, oh dude, 80% success rate. This is what we dreamed of. I can start trying from the ground. And then the next day I woke up and I was like, wow, my bicep is like aching. And then the day after that, I was like, oh my gosh, my bicep is really aching. And the next couple sessions, I was just kind of like testing how much my right arm could take, what was flaring it up, trying to figure out like, is this just a like a small bother, or is this something that I really need to take seriously? Like, could I tear my shoulder if I don't respect it? And I kind of learned that 2 things were really flaring up my bicep. It was the right hand move coming into the right hand start hold of Defying Gravity. It's like you get into this drop knee, you have a left hand side pull, and you have to hit this hold really high and then decelerate yourself. And that is just like the eccentric lowering on the right bicep. It was a lot. And then that paired with then going into like the most intense version of a 1 arm pull up on the move of Defying Gravity. Yeah, it was getting my rhomboids, like all the little shoulder stabilizers, my bicep. And so, yeah, that session 6 was really good for the psych, really bad for the body. And I ended up, getting it needled, taking like a full week of rest. And then even after all that, I was kind of just it was always in the back of my mind, like, I can't try this move too much or else it's going to flare up again. And that kind of was true through the end.
Yeah, I did notice that part in the video where you said something about, ooh, it's really bicep intensive. And then you rubbed your arm. And, I couldn't tell if it's like, how just when you're talking about something, how sometimes it makes you want to, rub your arm because you're talking about it. But I'm not surprised that there was some extra stress and some behind the scenes that was making your body flare up. And that makes me wonder about, did you just know you were going to send and you were making linear progress, or were there ups and downs on the sit? I know that you had a little accident in your car. It sounds like you had problems with your bicep. The videos make it look like it was predetermined. Oh, I did the stand. I started showing up next year, and yeah, it was a hard move, and I did the sit, and like everything's great. But I always have a hunch that that's not quite what was going through your head.
Yeah, definitely not. Although session 3, I was definitely I was feeling a little bit overconfident. Of session 3 of this year, it was the first day that I had restuck the first move, and I was just like over the moon. I was like, wow, dude, it took me 8 sessions to stick it last year. It only took me 3 sessions to stick it this year. Like, I'm going to start doing it every session. Like, and in that same session 3, I climbed from the start to having both hands on the start hold. And I was using like different beta at that point. And so from both hands on the start hold, I still had to like campus both of my feet out right to get them into the heel hook. And I wasn't able to do that like foot lever, but still just getting both hands on the start hold, I was like, dude, if I just have a good go from the ground, like everything flows, and then I get lucky on the move, maybe I could do it in the next 2 sessions. So yeah, definitely some overconfidence there. I was quickly humbled, but I was never discouraged. I was still enjoying the process. There's so much to learn on the intro. I don't think we ever really give a breakdown of the intro in the video, so I can kind of give that. It starts out with some really chill moves, just jug to jug, big move to like a super ergonomic pinch. Pretty much the first 4 or 5 moves are very low level, or not very low level, but low enough that they're not taxing much energy. They're just taxing maybe like some chalk, some friction. Once you cross your right hand into the place where you heel hook, you start to like really engage. And you have to stay pretty tight to the wall. I think we were saying it's probably the whole bottom intro is V13, and I think that still holds true for my beta. The meat of the difficulty is in the last 2 hand moves, but within that you're also doing 2 pretty significant foot walks. And the 2 hand moves that you're doing are very like fast. So if you miss the hold, it's really hard to readjust and it takes a lot of energy. Pretty much any of my goes from ground where I would miss either the right or the left hand start hold, it was just like I really stood no chance on the actual move. But it was kind of a cool, we talk about this a little bit in the video. The move to the right hand start hold is very thuggy, and the move to the left hand start hold is very like finesse. So doing those 2 things back to back and having like that kind of, you gotta like try hard and then you gotta float. It's really just a lot of fun climbing. And when I was first looking at the low start, I was kind of worried. I was like, oh man, it's like you're really traversing, you're going sideways for a long time. I really hope it's not just going to be like shuffling, and then you get to the move and then you have to do the move. Nah, it's like, it's intricate, man. You're doing crossovers, you're using like a really sick grip, some drop knees, some foot clamps. Your feet are trailing behind you, and then they shoot out in front of you, and then they go back to the right. It was nice. I was happy with how it turned out.
That sequence is seriously dope. That left hand under cling, you're like drop knee to come, and you like recycle all those holds. I just like when different holds get used for different hands or for heels. Like you definitely, yeah, that short little, probably like 6 feet piece of rock, you must do, 5 movements, not even including feet, just to get set up. So that bottom part that you said maybe is V13, but with all the difficulty concentrated in those last 2 moves, which then you have 0 rest. Not even rest is like a joke to do that big hard move. Okay, so now it's possible. You're like, okay, I climbed the bottom, it's possible. I've climbed the top, it's possible. How did you start dissecting the bottom, or even the transition from the bottom to the top, to make it easier and chip away at the difficulty a bit for you?
We kind of came to a like group decision that if I did the Defying Gravity move from 2 hand moves in, so doing the move to the right hand and the move to the left hand, along with all the foot moves, that was like the lowest point that I should try it from. Because anything lower, it would be like, well, I probably should have just tried from the ground because you're not adding that much. So, and I don't think I actually ever did that link, but I did do like starting right hand on the start hold, walking the feet up, doing the left hand, and then doing the move. I think I did that link a couple times. Even like after the easier section of the intro, you have your right hand on the heel hook hold, and you got to like move out to the side pull. That move ended up, I needed to find the right beta for myself. I was able to do it a few different ways, but I wasn't really realizing it at the time. It was like taxing me quite a lot, and especially in my right arm. Just shifting my foot like 2 inches on that like massive foothold down low with the left foot, it would make such a big difference in how much I had to control the release of the right foot with my right arm. So one day I figured out that on the right hand move, I was turning my drop knee too much. I actually needed to stay more square to the wall. And then on another day, probably like 2 sessions later, I figured out, oh, actually, I didn't figure this out. Sean Rabitou, shout out to Sean Rabitou. He figured this out for me. On the left hand move, I was just going for like the crimp. You need to hit the thumb, and the thumb helps you so much to like hold on to it.
Dude, how you said that on one session you figured out that you were drop kneeing too deep. And okay, let's say, Nathaniel, let's just say you were a coach. You were going to put your coach's hat on and you're trying to teach someone how to drop knee. What you would tell them is really suck in your hips, really getting close to the wall. Like that's what a drop knee is for. Do you know what I mean? And I guess I just always find this interesting. This is good to great, as always, is what you're telling me is that using the beta appropriately as a drop knee should be done was actually causing you a little, maybe it wasn't quite as efficient. And just maybe you can take me through that day as a little micro example of like, what do you mean it wasn't good to go too deep into the drop knee?
Yeah, it was definitely counterintuitive when you look at it on paper, but I feel like I always kind of knew just based on how it felt. I just didn't like want to believe it. Like when I was starting to try the move, I was like getting into the drop knee. I was pushing really hard on both feet, just trying to get as much weight into all the different contact areas that I have with the wall. And I was sticking the move, but I think on this move in particular, it's because you're coming into a kind of a compression on the two holds. And if you're compressing, you need your chest like square to the wall. You can't be shoulder turned into the wall. Like that's going to be super awkward. So as soon as I like let go of what I'm supposed to be doing and just did what feels good, then it was like, oh yeah, obviously you can't drop knee too much on this move.
All right, that's really cool. Thanks for diving into the super nitty gritty on that one. And it makes me think of something that you said again on the last podcast we did that always stood out in my head was I asked you something about what happens when you fall in a comp and how do you decide what you did wrong? And I'm totally paraphrasing because it's been a year since we talked about this. You said something along the lines of, don't get too emotional, just tap into your body's feelings and you'll have like a hint on what needs to be corrected. And so I hear you doing that on a move like this. But what I find interesting is that it's like move after move after move, session after session after session. And although I can see how the kernel is still the same, I'm just wondering if did you journal about this? Like, how did you keep all those little tidbits in your consciousness so that you can actually put them into action when it was time to send?
It's like every tidbit of information, every bit of micro beta you've worked so hard for. So it's like you can't forget it. Because, on that drop knee move, I've had 10 or 20 attempts that all felt wrong. And then I had the one attempt that felt good. It's like, ain't no way I'm forgetting about, keeping your chest to the wall. I worked too hard to make the same mistake I've already made. And it's just, yeah, it's an accumulation of those things. One mental trick that I do sometimes is I will have a few of the most key micro betas and I'll just run through them like as I'm sitting at the base getting ready to pull on for a send attempt. I'll just remind myself, okay, fast hand move on the right hand, hit the thumb with the left hand, and then pull with the heel on the move. And then you can't, or at least I don't like to rehearse the whole climb, visualize the whole climb before I pull on. That's like a bit mentally exhausting.
Interesting. Yeah. Different people, different styles, but I'm kind of with you where I like having a few kind of touch points. Like this is important to me at this spot. I want to make sure that I get that right. It makes me think of some quote called, or I've heard people say this, the good shit sticks. So that really important move that when it went well, you said that was a hard one, good beta. I will never forget. And you know what made me think of is this is why when you called Jimmy 10 years later, he's like, oh yeah, let me tell you about the micro beta. I remember it because it stuck.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true.
Okay, you're stacking these little wins on top of each other. You know it's possible. But if I remember correctly from the video, time is getting a little short. And I know you seem to be often overconfident, although I would argue that may be an asset, not a liability. But take me to the season kind of maybe changing and you're starting to go out there for solo sessions. Well, tell me about that vibe shift.
Yeah. So to put this all in context, there were a few things that were really special about this year. There was no bog under the boulder. You can't really tell this from the videos, but there's you can tell that there's a wood landing, but you don't really know why it's there. It's because there's usually like the nastiest of nasty bogs all underneath Defying Gravity. And so they've built this like incredible, like well-engineered log landing to keep everything dry. And that's how it was last year. I walked up this year all dry. And it was like, oh, that's going to be nice. I'm not going to be losing brushes to the bog now. I think something that I didn't realize at the start, but I realized quickly was there's a lot of humidity that's coming off the bog. And when it's not there, it was like so much better friction. Another thing that was really nice about this year compared to last was it was a lot warmer. And for this type of rock in particular, it's very, very hard, very good quality granite, but very slick holds. And the difference in temperature between the rock and your skin when you pull on is like a huge factor. You want them to be really close in temperature, and it creates the like least amount of condensation or something. And so when I first got to the boulder, it was like warm. It was like 65, when we were climbing. Maybe a little colder than that, but plenty windy. And it was like the best friction I had felt. So the warm temps was definitely key. And as it was, getting into late October, early November, mid-November, it was getting slowly colder and colder. We had a few snowstorms. It was cooling the temperature of the rock significantly. And I was noticing the friction was getting a little bit worse. So I definitely felt the time pressure on keeping warm conditions. And then I also just didn't want to let the chance to do it go because I didn't know if I was going to come back next year and there was going to be a bog and it was just going to feel like 10% worse. So yeah, definitely some pressure on those last couple sessions.
And it also seemed like your crew started kind of having to go and do other things, and that, yeah, you headed out there solo. What was it like trying one of the world's hardest boulders by yourself?
Yeah. So I enjoy solo sessions every once in a while. During the beginning of the process, I was climbing with Sean and Daniel. Noah and Ben were kind of coming up throughout the whole process, but they're both in school, and so Austin sent, so he wasn't coming up anymore. And yeah, I got back, or I think I had just taken a week of rest. There had been a lot of snow, and so I'd made my way back out there for a solo session, and I was pretty excited, honestly. Like having a lot of people, especially climbing with Noah and Adam, they are just, I mean, they're young, they're rapid firing, man. They're not taking a ton of rest. And sometimes it's like hard to get on the wall. So yeah, I wasn't too bummed about going out solo. I All that being said, of course I loved climbing with those guys. Great vibes. They're super strong. It was super inspiring. But it is nice to just have it all to yourself every once in a while. So I had really good vibes. I think this was session 12 was my first solo session. And that was when I had the go of like pretty much sticking the move. My foot came back into contact and then my left hand fired off. And man, I was pissed. Because it was like I had gotten the outswing, I had pulled up, and I was coming back in for the foot stomp, and I had the thought of, oh my gosh, I can't believe, I think I just did it. I think it's gonna work. And then just totally unexpected left hand fires off. And so yeah, that'll send you into a bit of a rage. um Session 13 was like polar opposite of that. I was coming down with like a cold. I felt like total ass on the hike up, just winded and felt like I was redlining. But, I took my time warming up. And when it came time to try from the bottom, I had enough energy and psych to like give good goes. And that was my first time sticking the move from the low, which felt incredible until I looked up for that next left hand and I realized, oh my gosh, my right arm is so tired. I don't know if I'm going to be able to like pull up to this, this like move where I'm moving like 1 foot vertically. I don't know if I have the juice to do that. But, you're on the send go, you got to try. And on that go, you'll see me kind of like shake my right arm out, try to get a little something back. My fingers were pretty numb at this point, and then I fumbled the second jump move like pretty bad, and I couldn't believe it. I never thought I would fall on that second jump move. I don't think I had fallen on that move since like session 2 of this season. My consistency was so high. I was like, it's risky, but I'm good at risky moves. I'm good at executing. I think I underestimated the fatigue to a high degree. And it's funny, when I fell on the second jump move, I didn't let out this big roar. I didn't like go into a fit of rage because for one, I was like completely exhausted. And for two, I was like, I kind of went into the comp mentality. I think it kind of pulled through for me. I kept my head together. I knew that if I lost my cool, it was going to take a lot of mental effort and a lot of time to get back into the mindset of I'm going to try my hardest, but I don't feel entitled to the send. And so, yeah, I stayed in it. I gave a few more attempts, but at the end of the day, I was too tuckered. And then it was time to head home for Thanksgiving, and I didn't know if I was going to have another shot after the holiday. So
I really liked that moment when you came down from not quite sending, where you fumbled that last jump move. And I don't remember exactly what you said, but you looked in the camera and you're like, I can do this. Or you're like, I got this far, I can do it. And there was a happiness there, but I'm sure that you were struggling with frustration. Like, why isn't it done now? And then this is why I'm always curious about with the pressure and the behind the scenes, because it's like, was this the last day? You're like, you're going to go home for a week for Thanksgiving. And I think that something I've learned over my climbing career, quote unquote career, is that I really like to get things done when I know they're possible, because it sounds all well and good that you'll come back next week. Then there's a big snowstorm or whatever the case may be. Like, you think you've got it, but you never have until you're standing on top. So what was that week like? What was going through your head?
I honestly didn't think much about the boulder. I yeah, I was like showing all my friends, showing all my family like the video, like, can you believe I fell on the second jump move? Like, what am I doing? Um, but yeah, I wasn't stressing about it too much. It was a change of environment. I got to see the family again, and it just felt like purely refreshing. And on my drive back out to Colorado from Salt Lake, I kind of like had this realization. I was like, oh man, I should probably start like thinking about this thing again and like rehearsing my beta and like finding my motivation. Like, it's almost time to try it again. So then I started going through the whole psyching myself up process.
You're such a pro that you just were able to leave it at the boulder, dude. I would have just been like in my head, this is gonna be the sickest boulder in the world. Like, I gotta do it. I don't know if I'd be able to sit down and enjoy pumpkin pie knowing that that was waiting for me, but it sounds like stepping away was what was required in some ways.
Yeah, and to be fair, like after dropping that second jump move, it was like pretty heartbreaking, but I felt like I deserved to fall because I just executed the move so poorly.
How hard is that move, do you think? Me and Austin were taking a stab, or Austin took a stab at, but I'm curious what you think it is.
I think people say 10 or 11. Um, and yeah, I would believe either of those grades. I've done it so many times that it's beyond a I couldn't put a grade on it now.
It's something that I found really interesting in the beginning of the Wicked video is when you're doing that big move, if you look at your left hand, the hand that starts on the start hold, it's like shaking. Like, the rest of your body is solid, but it's that left hand that's like right on the edge and exerting a ton of force. And it's just so cool that the next move is not that different, where you have to keep that together again. So, yeah, I mean, I know people listening may be like, oh, well, dude, it was still like a V double digit move. Like, it's not surprising to, mess that up. But when you have that on lock, I know that you were probably bummed for that. But you came back, you went out there, but you were solo. And what were the temps like? And like, what did you feel like? Were you coming back and everything was set perfectly, or was it a struggle to get back to where you were before?
So after dropping the second move, I was obviously bummed, but I was very confident because I had stuck the move from the ground, and I just had this sense of like, I know I can do it again. And when I come back from Thanksgiving, like I was checking the weather, it looked like the weather was going to hold. It was getting a little cold, but it was still climbable. Um, and so I was like, yeah, I think it could happen. I was confident. My 14th session, my final session of this season, I felt great. I was recovered from my sickness. I was mentally, physically refreshed. My shoulder wasn't hurting. And I feel like I warmed up super, super great in the gym. I had been warming up at Springs Climbing Center before every session, just so that once I got to the boulder, it only took me like 15, 20 minutes to re-warm up. And I had felt super strong in my warm up. So it felt like it was the session. My first go, the bottom felt perfect. And one other thing you'll be interested in, little micro beta change. On the left hand side pull undercling, there's like this spike that I was putting between my pointer and middle finger. And I asked Adam, how would you grab this hold? And he was like, oh, dude, I put that spike right on my pointer finger. And I was like, doesn't that hurt? And he's like, shut up, dude. It's better. And so I started doing that, and I started having way more control on the right hand move. So the intro felt great. I was hitting the right hand perfectly, getting my feet up, hitting the left hand. Like I was doing the move like slower than ever before, and maybe only having to readjust like once on the left hand. And then go for the big move, feeling great. And then my left hand fired off. And I was like, oh, that was weird. I've like never had that happen before. Take my 15, 20-minute rest, eat my applesauce, have a few gummy bears, and then gear up for the second attempt. And for perspective, like I think the most ground attempts that I felt like were viable were 4 per session. But more realistically, with my shoulder and with my bicep ache, it was like down to 2 or 3. So second go, I was like, this is going to be the go. I know it. I feel it. Feel great on the intro. I gear up for the move. I get my hand on the hold, but I can just already tell something had gone wrong. And I try to hold the outswing. And I think I might have just even like let go because I knew it wasn't the go. I rewatched the video, and my heel hook had just picked. And at that point I was really trying to keep it together because I was like, dude, I feel so good. It has to be this session. Like if it's not this session, there's no reason it's not going to be this session. And like I still had, I think, 2 more days of good weather before a snowstorm. And so it wasn't really my last session, but my motivation was kind of it was being tested because the big question in my mind had always been, can I do this move of Defying Gravity after doing a V17 intro? And so on session 13, I had proved, yes, I can. I just fell on the next move. So then it was like, okay, well, yes, you've done the big test. You did this one move after being super fatigued, but you didn't do the boulder. So you still got to do the boulder. You still got to stay psyched. But at the same time, I was like, man, I just kind of want to be done with it. So yeah, third go. Felt good through the bottom. My feet felt a little bit weird, but the move felt floater. And then I didn't have that like exhilaration that I did my first time sticking the move from the ground. I had like a sense of, okay, it is not over. I need to chalk up. I need to eye down this hold, and I need to execute this final move because I cannot fall here again. And I almost fumbled it again. It was it was close. I hit it like pretty shallow, and I had to try really hard to hold. But yeah, topping out from there, it's probably like V4 or V5. And I remember the first thought that I had was, am I sure that I started at the bottom? Like, I didn't dab or anything on the traverse, right? Because you just, yeah, you're in this state of disbelief as you're doing these outro moves. And then it was, yeah, just a massive sense of relief and psych. So,
Dude, one of my favorite parts of that send is when you stick that second jump move, the last hard move, and then you come in and you match it and you just let out this kind of guttural grunt that is just like, it's funny because it's not like exactly like, oh, I just sent. It's it's this thing like, I am not falling. Like I'm climbing super, just perfectly. You know that feeling when you're topping out and like you're climbing V4, but you're climbing it as if it's V17. You're just like, I'm finding this hold, I'm locking it off. And I just love that. Like, I don't know, man. I just felt like that release. It's not even a release of emotion. It's almost like channeling of emotion that you were right there, super present. And I know that sounds weird. You would think it would be that part where you top out, but it was that grunt that you let, or that yell you let out before the final topping out, that I just felt like encompassed that whole moment and journey. And then when you top out, you did make a little bit of noise and you sounded kind of happy, man. You sounded kind of psyched.
I was psyched. I was relieved. I was a whole lot of things. It was by far the most, I don't know, just the most powerful experience in my outdoor climbing. Like, I always hear people talk about, like, especially I remember Keenan Takahashi saying he's like addicted to the feeling of like sending a project, and like it just gives him like this big rush. And I've just honestly never felt something that powerful. And so I was like, I wonder if I'm just like not as psyched on climbing as Keenan is. But yeah, topping out this boulder, it was like, whoa, I am on top of the world. I'm giddy. I'm feeling all these things. I got a little teary eyed. It was, yeah, it was mega. It made all the, yeah, it's very cliche to say, but it made all the trials and tribulations very worth it in the end.
Yeah, maybe it's directly connected. Really, Nathaniel, I'm not sure anyone in the world is as psyched on climbing as Keenan. So
That's true.
find that out there.
It's bad to compare yourself to him.
It's kind of his secret, I think. I mean, you did tell me, you said that you wanted it more than anything else you've ever done, and that stood out to me, man, because it's a big statement for someone who's also stood on an Olympic podium. And dude, like you, FA Grand Illusion, that's a beauty as well. And so, yeah, after doing this, having such a big outpouring of emotion after the long journey, what does that make you think for what you want to do in climbing? Or actually, not even what's next, just what did that teach you about what you do love about climbing?
I think it was it was both encouraging and discouraging on finding another like mega project, because in that last session, like if I wouldn't have sent on that third try, I would have been in a rough spot mentally, and I'm sure I would have kept it together and like come out for a few more sessions, but I think my psych would have really taken a hit, and I would have been kind of like forcing the process, which a lot of people do. And I have just never done. And I don't know. I don't know if I got it in me, man, to force the process. Um, so that was interesting. But the other thing was, I want to find another boulder that, or another project that pushes me this hard and gives me the same sense of accomplishment when I do it. So definitely not for a while. I want some easier things some faster processes for a little bit.
Yeah, I have a hunch that you could have gone on to session 15 because when I hear about the other sessions, there was just as much reason to lose hope or to, kind of lose motivation, I should say. And I'm totally with you there where I'm not the best projector. And sometimes what I want to have click over is that something's possible. I'm like, can I do this boulder? And then when it clicks over where I'm like, oh, I can, it's hard for me to say like, okay, and now I'm going to do it. But something that really stood out to me when you're talking about each of these things is that you're literally telling me this is the set, this was session 12, this was session 13. And it just makes me wonder like how you knew which session you were on. Like, did you document it? Like that sounds like someone who's committed.
Yeah, I did. I put a little like event in my calendar for every session that I had. Um, and that was just more to keep track of how long each section of the process kind of took me, both for my own memory of the process, but also because I think that the amount of time dedicated is a pretty good indicator of the difficulty. Um, as long as you take into account every little factor that can extend or shorten your projecting time. So
Well, you proposed V17 for this climb for No One Mourns the Wicked. And we had a little bit of that breakdown on the sit, but what you didn't tell me was the breakdown of the stand. Well, I guess we talked about the outro hard move and then the easy top out. How hard do you think that first move is on the stand, and what led you to decide to propose V17 for the entire line?
so the breakdown of the stand, I consider it to be a V14 move, two setup moves, and then a V10 move. And the fact that they're both like low probability, high risk moves gives it that V15 grade. And I think that that's pretty well standardized at this point. Um, Watching Adam and watching Colin do Defying Gravity and Noah, I mean, they did it in 1, 2, and 3 sessions respectively. It just goes to show that like their generation is coming into climbing with like a brand new skill set that just was never had by anybody from my age or upward. So yeah, thinking about the V16 versus V17, it was haunting me. I mentioned it in the video. It was like all I could think about. It was like taking away from my process of appreciating the boulder. But now that I've got it done, I've got to decide what grade to propose, and it truly is just a proposal. But there's a few things that I really took into consideration. It did feel like significantly harder than Grand Illusion on the actual attempt that I sent. It did take me more than twice as many sessions. Some things to consider, though, are a few of my sessions were significantly impacted by getting in the car accident, having to deal with all the logistics of that. It takes away from like how locked in you can be. Working out the beta, and once you find the beta, then doing the move and believing that it is possible. It takes so much more time and effort than repeating a move or repeating a sequence. And so all these things, they bumped my session numbers like way up. And I think that people going for the repeat in the future, they're not going to get anywhere close to 22 sessions. So one thing that I'm not sure of is that second jump move like actually the red point crux? Because both times that I tried that second jump move from the ground, it felt like really hard. I was tired, I was nervous, and it is a precise move. You're going for a slot. If you go too far, you bump off the roof and you can't like get deep into it. And so, part of me wants to say, okay, if I just would have executed that move correctly, it wouldn't have felt as hard as it did. But then the other part of me says, I'm really good at execution. Like that's what made me a good comp climber, was doing difficult moves or complicated moves under high pressure over and over again. And so, yeah, I'm just going to be curious watching everybody else. If anybody else falls on that second move from the ground, maybe it is actually the red point crux.
Dude, tons to unpack there. And something that I was wondering about when you started breaking down these kind of metrics of this move is this hard and this move is this hard. And so we settle on this grade. And there's there's these formulas that get proposed. I think there's even a website. I haven't played around with it too much. I think it's called Darth Grader.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of a question for you, for someone who is experienced in these harder grades, where there's a side of me that if I was route setting and let's, instead of saying a V14 move and a V10 move or a V11 move, let's just say, what if it was a V4 move and then a V1 move?
Mm-hmm.
I would argue from a route setting perspective that next move is so lower down in the grade scale that it doesn't count.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a reason why you fell there. And then now you have this thing that you're like, oh, it's just a V10 move. But then taken in totality, perhaps is the red point crux. I mean, we'll have to get some confirms over. Maybe it'll take 10 years, but at some point, someone will give it another burn and give their feedback. And so I'm just wondering, like, do you think it's right to try to break things down and then stitch them back together and get a grade? Or do you have to consider something in its totality?
I think a grade difficulty should come from the red point crux. It should be like, what is the hardest move to do from the ground? And so in order to figure that out, it has to be taken in totality. And that's kind of why I mentioned that the V10 move is like very risky, very precise, because that's going to be a much harder move to do when you're fatigued rather than like a very controllable move, static V10. So yeah, I think every factor has to be considered in the grading.
I just want to keep digging into this, but something that I wanted to ask you about is that this new generation that kind of grew up on boards and has very strong fingers, may have had an easier time with that first move on Defying Gravity.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like maybe the hardest move, but as we were just talking or alluding to, perhaps maybe it ends up not being the hardest move or the red point crux on Wicked. And I was watching Wheel Rock when you were out there with Noah and Ben, and I don't know which number session this was, but something I found interesting is that you guys are all trying the sit. You guys are kind of all playing around with different beta, and I don't think it was totally all figured out at that point. But when I watched Noah on there, I'm a big fan of Noah. I don't want to say anything negative about him. He is an incredible athlete, incredible climber. But when I watched Noah in that transition from the low on those last couple of moves, there was kind of a lack of body tension, a swinging around. Maybe he hadn't figured out his beta yet. And of course, he did it with the campus for that first move. So perhaps that is going to be the way forward for him. But then they do a little clip of you and you link those moves. And you just had this tension. You had this I don't know, you just had this climbing look versus kind of swinging around, which is a little bit different than the boards. And so I was wondering what you thought about the grade when you have to have a myriad of skills and what those myriad of skills were required on Wicked compared to, say, just Defying Gravity.
Hmm. Yeah, so I think some things to like remember were in that video in particular is Noah was struggling to do that move to the left hand start hold. Something about like the foot clamp. Uh, it's just hard to keep like both feet on through that move. And now he's actually changed beta. He's not going to use the heel hook for the Defying Gravity move. He's going to use the Austin Guyman low left foot with the right foot pogo. And climbing into that is like way more his style. And he's looked really dialed on that. He's done some good links. So he's just not going to have to deal with, I guess, that move that was giving him some trouble. And he thinks the intro, I don't know if I believe him, but he thinks the intro is easier to climb into the Austin Guyman method rather than the Jimmy method. So
You know what's cool, man, is you guys, if Noah does it and does it in that different way, you guys are going to be the Daniel Jimmy style of 10 years later on Wicked on the sit, right? Like he's going to do it his kind of maybe more dynamic way, and you got a little bit more that technical tensiony, which is just I love these boulders that can be done a myriad of ways and showcase whatever skills they have. But the reason why I brought it up, other than I just found it super interesting, is a little bit to touch on more of the grading, where when you have something like Defying Gravity, where it really came down to a defining move in kind of maybe a singular style, you have these things where perhaps someone has a V15 board ability, and so they just go, oh, okay, like great, check, I did the move, I did the boulder. But when we get into these harder grades, and I would also argue better boulders may have these multiple gates that you must pass and be proficient and be at a high level in order to send the boulder. And so I'm just wondering about, you say it's like, oh, it's maybe a V13 low, and then it's, or into the stand, and it's like a V15 from there. But I just feel like that doesn't quite encompass what it takes to transition from that particular style of 2 move or 3 move V13 into a particular style of a V14 move. And so, how does that factor into grading?
yeah, you always got to think about like what muscles are being tired out from the intro. Are they the same muscles that are being taxed on the crux and on the red point crux? And in this case, yes, they are. The right arm is doing a ton of work through the intro, and then the right arm is what it's all about on the jump move as well. So definitely some similar style overlaps there to consider. So even if you look at like V13 into V15, maybe you don't consider that worthy of V17 unless you take into account, okay, yeah, but the one muscle that you need is being taxed in both things. So,
And again, on a nice little V10, V11 outro single move, same same arm.
exactly.
Can you tell me more about why you decided to name it No One Mourns the Wicked?
Yeah. So, Defying Gravity has always been like this meaningful and like incredible name. It had like all this aura around it. And when I was first trying the boulder, people were like asking me, if you do it, like, do you know what you're going to name it? And I was like, oh, yeah, I'll just call it Defying Gravity Low. Like it's the low start to Defying Gravity. That's kind of, it's a logical name. And they were just giving me so much shit. They were like, that is so lame, bro. Like that's not creative at all. People renamed low starts like all the time. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, I guess you're right. I'll think of a name, but I'm definitely not going off topic. Like it's got to be somehow related to Defying Gravity. So one name that I was thinking of was Low Gravity. I was also thinking of Anti-Gravity. I think that would have been a sick name, but that one's been taken. So good on you, Keenan, for coming up with a sick name. And then somebody mentioned to me, do you think Defying Gravity was named after the Broadway musical? And I was like, what are you talking about? They're like, have you ever seen Wicked? I was like, no, I actually haven't. And so the day after Ascent, I went and saw it in theaters. Highly recommend. If you're an enjoyer of good singing, holy cow, it'll give you goosebumps, no doubt. So yeah, Wicked is this like Broadway musical. It's about the Wicked Witch of the West and how she grew up and everything leading into her becoming this antagonist in The Wizard of Oz. Oh, and in the musical, Defying Gravity is like this really well-known song where she talks about letting go of her own limits and going and doing her own thing, not being held down by the people that oppress her. So I actually asked Daniel, I was like, did you happen to name Defying Gravity off of the Broadway musical? And he was like, I didn't know there was a Broadway musical. Not really that surprised. It would have been nice though. It would have been cool. But yeah, No One Mourns the Wicked is another song in the musical, and it was the one that just like affected me the most. We can get all into the what does it mean by the title? What does No One Mourns the Wicked? Is it like a condemnation? Is it a what does it mean for the wicked themselves? But it just got me thinking deeply, and I was like, it honestly sounds kind of sick too. So that's what I ended up calling it.
Well, I really like that you still paid homage to the stand, because there's just something about when you have another start, like I feel like it should just kind of have a nod to the original one. But
Mm-hmm.
I also am glad that you chose to kind of put your fingerprints on it with your own name, because it's kind of a step function and a big deal in today's world. It's a real, I mean, again, you propose V17, and even if it sells at V16, it's still going to be one of the hardest, most beautiful boulders in the world, especially in America. And so, if it wasn't that, maybe someone could argue that perhaps like you could just be like, oh, it's like the low start. But this is a big deal, Nathaniel. Like this is a sweet sweet line, a beautiful one, a test piece. And so I'm glad that you chose to put your mark on it. And on that same idea of aesthetics, there was no tick marks on the boulder when you did it, and that kind of blew me away. And you told me that that was on purpose, which kind of blew my mind. And so I wanted to hear the story behind that as well.
Yeah. I can't remember when I started to dislike the aesthetic of tick marks, but and I'll kind of preface this with like there's a good way to do tick marks and there's a bad way to do tick marks in my mind. I think the most beautiful state of a boulder is when it's like it's just been cleaned up, it's just been brushed, like maybe there's moss, but like the holes that you need to use are all clean and they're nicely chalked. And maybe like one or two holds have like little 1 inch ticks or something. That to me is like the most beautiful state of a climb. And then as it gets more chalked and more climbed, and people start putting more and more tick marks until every foothold has a little dab of chalk. Every hand has goalpost ticks. It just doesn't sit right with me. I don't like it. I apologize to anybody who I've brushed their ticks off of in the past, but if I walk up to a boulder and I don't want ticks, I'm brushing those ticks. You know, unless I'm climbing with somebody who's using them, I wouldn't be a dick about it. But yeah, while I was climbing on the boulder with Noah and with Adam, you know, they were using ticks and I was using those ticks, and they were, you know, they're helping me. Ticks work, but by the time I was doing my solo sessions, I had climbed on the boulder so much that I found that when I brushed off the ticks, like I just knew I had the pattern recognition for what the color and the shape of the rock, how it corresponded to where I needed to grab the hold. And so yeah, I figured if I can do it with no ticks, then I will. And yeah, my solo sessions did it with no ticks, and it was cool. I was psyched to like prove to myself that it is possible to learn where to grab a hold based purely on the features of the rock.
The ethos I was brought up with was that if you're going to use tick marks, that you were supposed to brush them away when you were done. It was just,
Yeah.
you know, that's that kind of leave no trace. Although I got to tell you, I'm right there with you, where I actually think a little bit of chalk is beautiful on a new climb. Like when it's just bare and there's no indication of where holds might be. I'm not going to say that it doesn't look good. Like nature is beautiful, but I love just that little hint of us, like that little, like climbers go here and these are what they grab. And of course I don't want things just be caked in chalk and dripping down. Like, oh, I hate when there's been water and you can see
Rain.
like, oh God,
Yeah.
not my jam. But I do like a hint that we're there and we're interacting with the rock. And I think it makes it beautiful. And so I don't know, man, I just applaud you on deciding to have a style and an aesthetic and carrying through with it. I think I will still use tick marks, especially on my hardest sentence, but just not leave them there. So yeah, I like that though, man. That's kind of cool.
And I'm still going to use tick marks if it's a boulder that I'm unfamiliar with. You know, if I don't have time to learn what to look for in the rock features, then yeah, I'm going to use a tick if it makes my process easier, more enjoyable. But yeah, I encourage people to just have a second thought before you put the tick on. Do I really need this? And if you do, good on you. Go for it.
Well, it's interesting when you told us how you break down moves and it was working on these little things and then they start to become ingrained in your body physically and subconsciously, where in some ways, you know, how much do you even need to look at a hold or know it? Like it's part of the outcome of stacking all these little perfections. You know, okay, I put my heel just right, I glance at the hold, and then I pull on my heel and then it swoops me perfectly to the right place, and then I pull through. And you know, when you like swing back in and your foot would land right on that start hold,
Mm-hmm.
like I feel like that was determined way before. It wasn't that you were like, okay, there it is, I'm gonna aim for it and hit it. It's kind of like part of the whole dance. And so I can see how even on the most difficult moves, when you build up that familiarity, how it just kind of is an execution and not so much like, oh, I had a 2-foot tick, so that was what happened. Yeah.
Yeah. Your body starts to just do the same thing
Yeah.
over and over. Tick or no tick.
Uh, Before we wrap it up, I just realized that I have to ask you this question about that move, and I'm talking about the stand move on Defying Gravity. That initial really hard move is, where's that rank in the hardest moves you've ever done / tried in the world?
I mean, I haven't tried many hard moves, so it's by far the hardest move I've ever tried. It is maybe most comparable to the move that I did on Transients in Little Cottonwood. It's a V14, and it was originally done with like a technical knee bar, but then still like a pretty hard left hand move. And the way that I did it, because I couldn't work out the knee bar, was I just did like a one move jump. And it's pretty much, if you do it that method, it's pretty much a one move boulder. There's a few setup moves, there's a few outro moves, but it really revolves around that. And it was significantly easier than Defying Gravity. So,
Well, I've seen you try some other hard moves. There's I'm sure you've sampled quite a few of what the U.S. has to offer. Uh, does this make you interested on seeking out really hard moves? That whole board lord video discussion where you and Colin were working on a move that maybe looked impossible from the outside, from Mike and Will and Quinn probably watching you, and I'm guessing they have a good idea of what moves go and don't go. Those guys are experienced and have climbed with the best of the best, and just the fact that you guys were able to unlock that, is this something that you think you're now going to continue pursue, is these quote unquote impossible moves?
mm, not necessarily, but I feel like the next time I run into a move that feels impossible, I'm just going to be so much better prepared for it. That being said, like I do really want to try the understanding. Talking to Adam, it sounds like a very similar boulder, and so I would just be curious how how that boulder would feel for me. And it's, oh my gosh, it looks like such an incredibly beautiful boulder. I would love to climb on it.
Dude, you should go out there with Austin Guyman. He definitely mentioned that boulder too. It looks so good, man.
Yeah.
So yeah, you have really transitioned into your outdoor career, man. What does that look like for you over this next year? I didn't see a year you made this transition fully. How did it feel to have success in this discipline versus kind of your previous discipline of more comp climbing, where you had incredible success and now you're matching it, man?
Um, man, I wouldn't say matching it. It does feel cool to have a little bit of success in outdoor bouldering, and honestly, just to be learning so much. Like comp climbing taught me so much about climbing movement, and you can apply that really well, but finding the right conditions, using the right tactics, you know, using shoe spray, using rhino spit, uh, or dry when you need to. It's like there's so many little things that the best climbers in the world are doing, and the best boulders in particularly, um, that you just don't see. And so learning all those things has been really cool.
Yeah, I noticed that you used two different shoes for
Yeah.
and it also just makes me wonder about, there's all these little micro band tactics that outdoor boulderers use. And then when you sent your hardest boulder, you were by yourself. And it's so different than having literally, I mean, the whole world cheering you on loudly. And what's it like to lock in, or is there any difference to locking in when you're out in the woods by yourself under a beautiful boulder versus screaming fans, cameras in your face? How did it feel differently?
Oh yeah. I mean, there's a big difference. I feel like in competitions, when you have a big crowd around you, the moment when you get the most energy out of the crowd is when you know pretty well what beta you need to do on a boulder. And the thing that you need to unlock it is maybe just a little bit more try hard or a little bit more strength. Um, a little bit better timing, and when you can like stay calm but still harness like the energy in the crowd, I think that's what leads to the best moments in competition. And yeah, for a solo session outdoors, it's just all on you. But you know, I think the similar thing is you need to find that feeling of I'm about to do it. So for me, in my last session, I had 3 goes from the ground, and the first go, I was just confident. You know, I wasn't thinking about anything. I was just like, all right, let's give it a go. I think it's gonna go well. The second go, I tried to rehearse more beta and like maybe take more of like a focused, determined approach. And then my third go, I tried to think about nothing at all. And I don't know if that's the reason why I sent on the third go, but it was definitely like a viable method. When you know something so well, like I remember when I was doing a lot of speed climbing, I was working with like a sports psychologist, and she was telling me that when you know how to do something, like sprinters before their big races, they tell me that the thing that works best is not thinking about anything. They're not thinking about like what the race means to them, what their goals are. They're not thinking about how to start, how to get the best acceleration. They're just blank head. And so I would apply that to speed climbing, and it would help me not like mess up my beta. So I kind of applied that to this one as well. And yeah, just pulled off the ground, not thinking about anything. No beta rehearsal, no self motivational talk. Just pull off and let your body know, or let your body do what it knows how to do.
It's kind of beautiful, man. Those states where you're almost just watching yourself do its thing is rare, and it sounds like it truly comes from mastery of the climb that's in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just you can't be precise and beautiful when you don't know it inside and out. And so that's, I don't know, it's something I'm gonna try to think about when I start digging into my projects, is how do you just kind of let it go, like that the work has already been done. It's either it's going to happen or it won't.
Yeah.
All right, man. Let's make sure that we shout out Austin Guyman. He is the reason that this podcast happened. I had recorded one with him and his amazing journey on Defying Gravity. And right after we clicked stop, he gave me a little hint that maybe you had done something really cool, which now we know was you sending the low. It's going to be one of the most beautiful and sought after climbs now, the test piece of our generation. And he put us in contact, and I just want to say thank you to him. And I think he maybe helped you out over this journey as well.
Oh yeah. I mean, I don't know if you recognize the background if you're watching on YouTube, but yeah, I am currently staying at Austin's house, and I've been staying with him through almost all of the process of trying Defy. So yeah, huge shout out to Austin, providing providing support. He owns the gym that I warm up at every day, providing pads and just being a homie all around. So
And I also think we should maybe shout out Ben Nielsen for making some just incredible videos, helping to document the process of you on both of these climbs. This is again being released simultaneously with No One Mourns the Wicked on, I think it's going to be on YouTube on the Mellow channel. And I just love these dope flicks. And although of course, I love the medium of podcasting and getting to hear all this nitty gritty. To me, again, it's just different ways to showcase the incredible experience that you had. And I just want to also say thank you to you for sharing it, whether it's through video or through podcasting. I mean, those things are special when you're out there doing it solo and having those moments, but they also, when I hear them, they also inspire me, inspire others to go out there and have our own adventure. And so I just don't want to, I think it's important to point out the value of you taking the time to share what happened.
Yeah, man. Thank you for giving me the platform to like dive deeper into what happened on No One Mourns the Wicked, because the video is sick, but it's only 20 minutes to cover like a huge process, and I felt like that was a bit of a shame that so much of the story was going to be lost out on. So yeah, thanks for helping me out, sharing the story.
What a journey, dude. Even though I love that we get to have maybe a couple of hours describing it, you never can quite encapsulate the journey you went through, and
Yeah.
that's okay. It's just the reality. And so, even though of course we left out something because there's never enough time to capture everything.
Yeah. Nah, but we hit we hit all the big things.
Okay, well, let's make sure to shout out your sponsors because they helped make it a reality that you could go out there and go 14 sessions deep. Where can we find this video, and who helped support you on it?
Oh yeah. You can find this video on the Mellow channel for YouTube. Big shout out always to the North Face for sponsoring this video, and Scarpa as well, my two biggest supporters, and for supporting this video. Just much appreciation.
And before I let you go, I'm going to ask you my classic question, which is, Nathaniel, how do you go from good to great?
Yeah, I've been prepping for this one. Throwing back to something that I mentioned on like the final piece of beta to unlock the move of Defying Gravity. I said on this one particular go, I was just more calm, or like more paying attention to what was happening in my body. And I think that that is a huge key in going from good to great. If you dedicate all of your mental energy to trying hard, then you're not going to be able to like take a step back and focus on what was helping you and what was hurting you and what your body wanted to do to change your body position. So yeah, I guess try less hard when you're learning a move and think more about what your body wants to do to find better balance.
God, this one hits hard to me, and it kind of reminds me of some of the stuff we talked about last time, just because I like trying hard,
Mm-hmm.
but I like sending even more. And I would say that this is again on that journey from good to great. What I often find is that good is kind of doing the things we all should do, like sink into that drop knee, make a deep drop knee, try really hard, don't half-ass it. But then talking to you, Nathaniel, it's almost like you have to unlearn some of the things to really tap into the best of the best. And what you said really resonates with me specifically as someone who typically just digs in even deeper. Like I'm going to try even harder. And sometimes that works, but that doesn't quite encompass what intricate, complex movements are. It maybe encompasses what like a one-arm pull-up is, but that's not really what climbing is anymore. And so I love that one, man.
And like, you know, getting deep into the drop knee and following the basics, learning the basic techniques, that's going to get you good. And then to go to great is learning when you need to break the rules that you thought were an always kind of thing. So
Well said, Nathaniel. No One Mourns the Wicked, V17, beautiful, beautiful boulder. I'm going to argue again that it may be the most beautiful V17 in the world, which I always feel like when you're breaking into these new difficulties that personally, I love it when they're beautiful. And that can be a little subjective there, but let's face it, when I walk up to something, I want to be a little intimidated and struck by its beauty. And I don't want to take anything away from the other hard climbs in the world, but I just wanted to shout out that it's so cool that you broke into this barrier in one of the most beautiful climbs. Well, just period. And then to slap that hard grade on it and know that it's one of the hardest climbs in the world just takes up another notch. And so if everyone wants to see it, they should go to YouTube and go to the Mellow channel and watch. First, you should watch Ben Nielsen's video of Nathaniel doing Defying Gravity because it segues perfectly into you doing No One Mourns the Wicked. I really liked how they were connected. And right before we clicked record, I made sure to watch them in tandem, and they fit together beautifully. And I'm just psyched for you, Nathaniel. Congrats, man. Heck yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, hopefully I'll see you another year with a whole nother litany of sends. I really appreciate you taking the time to share it with me. And I love that you wanted to add some behind the scenes to the incredible video. And thanks for just going into the serious nitty gritty with me.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you to everybody that listened as well.
All right, man. Take care.
See ya.